Whispers in the Wilderness, The Legends of the Silver Bear and the Whistling Warrior. The Silver Bear's Call. In the deep forests of the Appalachians, where the trees grow tall and the winds carry whispers from ancient times, there is a legend known only to those who truly listen to the land. It is the story of the Silver Bear, a mystical creature said to roam the wilderness with fur like moonlight and eyes that gleam with the wisdom of the ages. The bear was no ordinary animal. It was a protector, a guardian of the forest and the people who lived beside it, especially the brave warriors who respected the ways of nature. The legend began long ago when the land was young and wild, and the Native American tribes were scattered across the hills and valleys. Among these tribes was a young warrior named Waya, known for his keen instincts and the extraordinary whistling song he could create with nothing but the wind and his breath. He was not just any warrior. He was a guardian of the sacred lands, chosen by the spirits to protect the balance between nature and mankind. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the forest, Waya sat by the river, listening to the sound of the rushing water. His people had always respected the land, never taking more than they needed, and Waya had been taught since childhood that to live in harmony with the wilderness was to live with the spirits. He could feel their presence all around him. The whispers of the past carried on the wind, the songs of the earth echoed in the trees. But tonight something was different. The wind brought with it a strange chill, and the usual soft rustling of the leaves seemed to quiet. It was as if the very forest was holding its breath. Waya stood up, his senses sharp. He had heard tales of the Silver Bear, stories passed down from elder to elder, of a mighty creature whose power could only be matched by the forces of nature itself. It was said that when the Silver Bear called, only the bravest souls could follow its cry without fear, for it was the bear's summons that led to the most dangerous trials in the wilderness. Some believed the bear was a messenger of the gods, others thought it was the spirit of the land, seeking out those worthy of its wisdom. As the evening wore on, Waya heard it, a low, haunting growl that reverberated through the trees, echoing off the mountainsides. It was unlike any animal he had ever heard, a growl that seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. Without thinking, Waya grabbed his bow and quiver, and with a deep breath, he began to follow the sound, his feet moving swiftly through the forest. The wind picked up as he moved deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker around him, their gnarled branches twisting like the fingers of ancient spirits. The growl grew louder, and soon Waya found himself standing at the edge of a clearing, where the moonlight illuminated a massive figure in the distance. It was the Silver Bear, its fur shimmering like silver in the moonlight, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. But the Silver Bear was not alone. Beside it stood a tall, mysterious figure, another warrior, but one unlike any Waya had ever seen. This warrior wore a cloak of feathers, and his face was painted with intricate designs that seemed to change as the light shifted. He stood silent, his eyes fixed on Waya with a gaze that seemed to pierce through him, as if he knew everything about him before Waya had even spoken a word. Waya's heart raced, and he felt the weight of the moment settle upon him. He had heard of the Whistling Warrior, a figure from ancient tales who was said to wield the power of the wind itself. Some said he was a spirit, while others claimed he was a mortal man who had been granted eternal life by the gods. Whatever the truth, Waya knew he stood before a force that could not be ignored. The Silver Bear's growl echoed again, this time more powerful, more insistent. The Whistling Warrior raised his hand, and with a single whistle, the winds shifted. The trees bent, and the air crackled with energy. The warrior's voice, deep and resonant, broke the silence. "You have answered the call, Waya," he said. "But are you ready to face the trials of the wilderness? The Silver Bear has brought you here for a reason. To prove your worth. To learn what it means to truly protect this land." Waya stood tall, his heart steady. He had no choice but to face whatever challenge lay before him. He had been chosen by the spirits, and now he would answer their call. As the winds howled around them, the Silver Bear let out a mighty roar, its voice blending with the wind. And with that, the adventure began. The trials of the wilderness. The air grew still, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the distant howls of unseen creatures. Waya stood facing the Whistling Warrior and the Silver Bear, his heart racing but his resolve unwavering. The moonlight bathed the clearing in a silvery glow, casting long shadows as if the very forest itself were watching. The air had a heaviness to it, filled with the weight of ancient magic, and Waya felt the stirrings of something much older than himself, a force that had shaped the land for centuries. The Whistling Warrior's eyes never left him, and in that gaze, Waya saw both challenge and understanding. The warrior raised his hand again, signaling Waya to approach. "The trials begin now," the Whistling Warrior spoke, his voice like the wind, shifting and changing with the gusts. "The silver bear has called you here for a reason, to test your strength, your wisdom, and your heart. To protect the land, one must first prove that they understand it." Waya stepped forward, his feet light on the forest floor as if the ground itself was welcoming him. The silver bear let out a low growl, almost as if to encourage him. Waya could feel the pulse of the forest in his bones, the ancient rhythm of the world moving in time with his own breath. "Your first trial," the whistling warrior continued, "is to cross the river of shadows. It is said that those who attempt to cross are tested by their greatest fears. The river takes on the shape of their darkest thoughts, and only the brave can navigate its waters. If you fail, the river will swallow you whole and you will never return." Waya nodded. He had heard stories of the river of shadows. No one had crossed it without change. It was said to bring forth visions, to expose the very soul of the person who tried to cross, to show them their deepest regrets and fears. But Waya was determined. He had come this far and there was no turning back. The silver bear moved slowly, its massive paws silent on the earth. With a powerful yet graceful movement, it stepped into the forest, heading toward the riverbank. Waya followed, and the whistling warrior raised his arm, a soft whistle echoing through the trees, signaling the beginning of the journey. The river lay ahead, its waters swirling in a dark mist. The air around it grew cold, and the ground beneath Waya's feet seemed to soften as he drew closer. He could hear the whisper of the river, not a sound but a voice, whispers of doubt and fear echoing through his mind. Waya stood at the edge, peering into the dark, churning waters. The river was as wide as a canyon, its depths hidden in shadow. He could see no path, no way to cross, only the swirling darkness that promised to pull him under. But he had come for this moment, and he would not be deterred. Without another thought, Waya stepped into the water. The moment his foot touched the river's surface, the world around him shifted. The mist thickened and the air grew heavier. The whispers of the river grew louder, their voices growing into a chorus of fears. Waya's mind was flooded with visions. Visions of his past, of choices he had made, of regrets long buried. He saw his father, an old warrior, lying on his deathbed, telling him that one day the land would call him to protect it. But the guilt that had followed him since his father's death, guilt that he had not been there when his father needed him most, gripped his heart. The water around him began to swirl faster, the shadows of his past closing in. The whispers twisted in his ears, growing louder. "You are not strong enough," they hissed. "You failed those who depended on you. The land will never be safe with you as its protector." Waya's legs trembled, and for a moment he thought of turning back. But then he remembered the forest, the spirits that watched over him, and the silver bear that had brought him here. He remembered the words his father had spoken, the lessons he had learned from the land, and the warriors who had come before him. Taking a deep breath, Waya closed his eyes and let the whispers fade into the background. He focused on the sound of the wind rustling the leaves, the beating of his own heart, the call of the silver bear that echoed in his chest. The whispers quieted, and the shadows receded, leaving only the clear water of the river before him. With newfound strength, Waya stepped forward, moving through the river as the shadows tried to cling to him. But he was no longer afraid. He had faced his fears and understood that it was not the past that defined him, but the choices he made in the present. The river seemed to recognize his resolve, and as he reached the far bank, the darkness faded, and the light of the moon returned. The silver bear was waiting for him on the other side, its gaze proud and knowing. "You have passed the first trial," the whistling warrior said, stepping forward. "But there are more challenges ahead. The wilderness will always test you, but if you listen closely, it will also guide you." Waya stood tall, his heart still racing, but his spirit stronger than ever. He had crossed the river of shadows, not just with his body but with his heart. And now, with the silver bear by his side, he was ready for whatever came next.